Just moments ago, Andrew Dillon issued an all-staff email to everyone at AFL headquarters, and it was strong. It centred on the alleged victims. It vowed to examine the wider culture of Australian rules football and the AFL. Really, the AFL in this situation turning the mirror on itself. It was extensive and was adamant that the league is taking this both seriously and will hold the players to account if it is required to do so. So no penalties as yet. Scotty, as Jared mentioned, Sydney putting the final touches on a statement from their point of view, but it was strong from the league chief executive.
Yeah, it's well done. You've got to give them a tick. I mean, they've been whacked a lot, this administration, but it captured the sentiment of the public out there. It touched on what's happening, the culture of football, and acknowledging that obviously the people involved in this, it's very sensitive. So I think they deserve a tick, which, Ralphie, we haven't been saying too often about league at the moment, but that was a very good statement.
The Swans have carriage of the investigation. John, how did that play out today?
So the Sydney players who met with their lawyers in the club are already bracing for suspensions. You look at this statement and you look at the fact that we can do both. We can talk about a broader reckoning across the competition, and we can also penalise these players for the specifics of that night. So that punishment likely to see them suspended for 2 weeks and more, and the only question really is whether it's 4 or 5 players. And so the players were taken off site when they returned to Melbourne, from Melbourne to Sydney, having driven across the night. Some had their own lawyers. The club's hierarchy spoke to those players. They want to know in forensic detail what happened last night. So they want to know the circumstances. They want to know why the females were brought into this room. Any other issues or any other specifics that might deal with regards to any of the rules and regulations of the AFL competition. So the police will very much handle the criminal investigation, but it's Sydney that will handle these punishments. Why Sydney and why not the AFL, Lauren?
So I spoke at length with a number of people at the AFL today who are adamant that while Victoria Police is investigating this, they will not be. So there were suggestions today that the players were set to be punished under rules surrounding conduct unbecoming and bringing the game into disrepute. The AFL is adamant that they've made no such inquiries at the moment, and in the immediate term, they are not looking to, I suppose, exercise those rights as the governing body. That, of course, can change and can change very quickly. So at the moment, it is in the hands, the two separate arms of this, in the hands of the Sydney Swans, Scotty, and then also Victoria Police. Of course, the AFL doesn't want to impact on that all-important police investigation that obviously all eyes are centred on at the moment.
So these are the 4 players who volunteered to speak to police and weren't at training today. So it's Isaac Heaney, Chad Warner, James Jordan and Riley Bice. So, Ralphie, what happened in this mystery 3 hours?
So this is what we know. There were 5 players at one stage in the room with the 2 females who'd been asked to join those Sydney players at about 4 o'clock after a night out in the town. So one player is at the centre of the Victoria Police investigation, and the accusation centres on unnecessary contact, issues of consent, of inappropriate contact. The police are focusing their interest on that one player and his actions in those hours. Now, there were 5 players in the room at one stage. At the time of the alleged incident, there were only 4 players in the room, and of course by 7 o'clock those women were in the lobby and they were making their complaints very strongly known, including to police. I think the one issue here will be that the AFL will need to step in, or through Sydney's guidance there, but this police investigation can go in its own way. It could take weeks, it could take months, or it could take days. It won't care about Sydney and its premiership aspirations.
And this is where, John, it is also worth noting there is no suggestion that the players that have been named are actually being investigated, just that they were spoken to by Victoria Police yesterday before, as you said, they travelled back to Sydney. Victoria Police issued another statement this morning that no formal interviews have been conducted. Of course, the seriousness of the allegations really needs to be acknowledged here, and always, of course, keeping the alleged victims in mind who are at the heart of this. That's really all that we can say on that side of it from a legal standpoint, and I guess it's really only the other elements that can be discussed at the moment.
Lauren, could you educate us on the specifics of this? We talk about it in terms of punishment, in terms of a premiership window slamming shut. I think we've completely missed the point here. So why is it that it's so important to talk about the victim here and not the punishment that might solve all crimes in regards to these Sydney players?
Well, this is where it's an interesting one, isn't it, John? Because that is part of the issue, the ramifications for these Sydney players in a work sense. But it's not the heart of the issue here, which falls with the alleged victims who, you know, these players may face weeks on the sidelines. These women could face years, a lifetime of pain to stem from this. As we say, they are serious allegations, and they are only allegations at this stage. But no one yet knows the facts, only the allegations that have been made. So it is worth noting, and I know others have made this point today, that 1 in 5 Australian women over the age of 15 will experience sexual violence in their lifetime. That's 1 in 5 footy fans. That's 1 in 5 club members. That's 1 in 5 AFLW players. They are really stark statistics, and really goes to the heart, I think, of this issue, particularly in Australian society. So I think it's really important in this scenario not to ignore that or sideline that in any way, because it's, as I say, the Sydney factor and the ramifications that these players may face and how it affects their final series. Yes, that really affects them, and that is important in a football sense, which is we are football journalists. This is a football show. That is the reality of the scenario. But it cannot be ignored at the cost of what these women are alleging has occurred and what they have been through, John, because that is really the heart of the issue. I spoke to Kate McCarthy, a former AFLW player, today. She was incredibly strong about the culture that this, I guess, feeds out about AFL, and people that might not be interested in football must just look at this and think, what on earth is going on over there? So she spoke really strongly about the potential effect on women that work within the industry, AFLW players that are working closely within these clubs, and really put it back on the AFL to examine itself in a scenario like this.
And I wonder whether the AFL finally actually got that message today as well. In that statement from Andrew Dillon, being clear about the standards means being prepared to act when those standards are not met. So hopefully this is a seismic day for the AFL industry.
And importantly, Loz, Sydney's spoken to the AFLW players. They made a priority of that today?
They have. So Dean Cox addressed the men's team, and the women's players were also addressed in a separate meeting, is my understanding, at Sydney today. And from all reports I've spoken to several people who were in the room, it was a very positive experience. They very much feel like they've had their arms wrapped around them by their club, which is obviously really important, given that there's a lot of them that I guess have suffered a real emotional toll by what the last 36 hours, which I'm sure pales in comparison to the women that are at the centre of this. But it just goes to show, doesn't it, the ripple effect of this kind of thing.
And the ripple effect goes on. The problem here for Sydney is they've worked so hard to almost establish this perception of just being squeaky clean, of being moralistic, of being holier than thou. So they banned St Kilda from the Pride game when the Lance Collard saga reared its head. That was a complex scenario. St Kilda had actually come up with that concept, and out they went. So when you are holier than thou, there are going to be sponsors out there that are going to be absolutely appalled. I mean, this is a club that has the most expensive AFL and even sporting real estate on its back in terms of how much its sponsors mean to them. Isaac Heaney, he's Mr Squeaky Clean. He's got 3 children's books. He's cultivated that image. We see so many, amazing shots of him and his partner. They are due to be married in coming months. So the ripple effects there are significant. And again, we will let justice do its thing, but it's a very damaging scenario for a club that is perceived as a certain way.
It's such a great lesson to all AFL players and clubs out there. It can just happen just like that.
It is. I spoke to a number of those sponsors today, actually, which naturally were not keen to speak to the issue, a number of them expressing their disappointment, but no movement there at this stage. The All-Australian team squad, John, was due to be announced today. That was delayed. What is the latest with that?
So instead of issuing that statement, Andrew Dillon was to be on the 360 desk explaining that 46-person statement today. That squad will now be released next Monday after the last All-Australian meeting, which is Monday morning. But quite clearly, every All-Australian has to attend that event on Tuesday night. The Fremantle players, they will wait in Melbourne after their Saturday game. So what does it mean for the AFL with Isaac Heaney? Now, there are some players who are probably on the borderline of this squad and indeed the side, but Isaac Heaney, he is a no-brainer. He's probably starting at half forward. So the Hall of Fame has those morals clauses, and it certainly has people who've been excluded or people that have been made to wait significant years, like Ben Cousins. But he's a walk-up starter. Scotty, what do they do here? Because everyone gets interviewed. It's really a challenge to have an empty chair there on that Tuesday night function.
I think you have to select him. I think you have to select on the basis it is the best players for the whole year. So you select that and then you deal with what happens down the track. If this investigation is still going, I think if Isaac's not there, yes, you make the point, he's supposed to be there. I think we could all live if he's not there. But I think if, say, things go in a different way in 2 weeks' time, and then you look back and go, we didn't pick Isaac Heaney. So I just think you go black and white on the selection, just do what you've already said you were going to do. He's in, and then deal with the stuff around it on the night and then further down the track.
Do you think, and this isn't to call for special treatment for AFL players by any stretch of the imagination, but the pain that this would be causing victims by this scenario dragging on, conversations around, as you say, John, team selection and All-Australian selection, which are not the issue here, it's really on the police, the club and the AFL to move quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. I think hopefully the police. Sometimes these things can drag on, and I don't pretend to know what a police investigation entails, but you would think there's some urgency from all parties. This can't be, you can't just plonk this and let it drift. This is not one of those scenarios.
I couldn't disagree more. I think the AFL is really, really careful not to be seen to be securing special treatment here. So remember, of course, that there are 8 police at that venue. They're having to work through all these. I understand what you're saying. I just think that the optics of that, if anyone from AFL House was seen to be saying, hey, let's just hurry this treatment along, it's a bit inconvenient for our finals, I think that would be a disastrous scenario.